I do not know anything worse than betrayal. The pain and thoughts that visit you when you are betrayed by a loved one is the most terrible feeling. But everything has a downside, no matter how painful it is. If you don't give up, you can get out of an unpleasant situation and come out with a good bonus. My unfaithful wife got what she deserved. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. There they were, standing right in front of me, delivering the news with apparent concern for my well-being, but seemingly oblivious to how it would be received. I may not have been outwardly expressive throughout my life, but just because I don't wear my emotions on my sleeve doesn't mean I don't have them. In fact, I have deep feelings. The pain was unbearable. It kept getting worse and worse until everything finally went black. Growing up in the Midwest, I was always a quiet child, or so my parents tell me, and I somewhat remember. I was also reserved and cautious, at least by others' standards. People often described me as smart and cute, although that wasn't always to my advantage. This was especially true in 6th grade when Mrs. Jensen declared to the entire class, "Jimmy Quayle, you've got to be the most gifted student I've ever had in my 16 years of teaching." In the competitive environment I grew up in, many kids didn't appreciate the grading curve being disrupted by a smarty pants, which made me even more reserved. My older brother, Kent, who is 2 years older than me, really helped a little. He tried to involve me in his studies, unless his friends strongly objected. In such cases, he excluded me, but always tried to do it gently. Kent was mostly an extroverted athlete, while I was more of an introverted intellectual, so we rarely competed directly for our parents' attention. However, when there was direct competition, it seemed to me that the extroverted athlete won about 90% of the time. College has become a better experience for me compared to elementary and high school. At the Ivy League school, which I attended on a full academic scholarship, intelligence was highly valued, and being both smart and cute was beneficial when dealing with women. I graduated from school a year earlier, and I had several pleasant relationships with my classmates, both platonic and intimate. By the time I graduated from high school, I believed that I could give pleasure to my partners as they often praised me for my skills. I met Giselle in my 2nd year working as an analyst for the company, as the CIA is fondly referred to in the Washington, D.C. area. Our paths crossed in a bar in Georgetown. Although a bar is rarely the ideal place to find a romantic connection, I made an exception since we were both out with separate groups celebrating a friend's recent engagement. Neither of us frequented bars to meet potential partners. For me, it was truly love at first sight. I can't speak for Giselle, but she seemed quite interested. To cut a long story short, we left the bar together to continue our conversation elsewhere, began sleeping together within 3 weeks, and got married 3 months after we met. My first intimate encounter with Giselle strengthened my feelings for her. It was our 4th date, and throughout the evening she was very affectionate, although she hardly drank alcohol. The way she snuggled up to me and the glances she cast at me with her big brown eyes testified to her complete readiness. She obviously didn't say anything like, "Let's get on with IT," or "I need you," but she signaled her willingness with every conceivable nonverbal sign. When we got to my apartment, she didn't immediately take me to the bedroom. Instead, she continued to give nonverbal signals indicating her agreement. We had a wonderful night and an equally pleasant morning. After breakfast, when I accompanied her home, she looked at me tenderly and kissed me, saying, "Thank you very much, Jimmy. You're so kind and caring. You can do whatever you want with me at any time." Then she turned around and entered her apartment. One day, as an experiment, I met her for lunch, and we quickly made love right at her workplace. Giselle was perfect for me. Giselle had lost her parents a few years before I met her. Her closest living relative, both emotionally and geographically apart, was her sister Michelle. Giselle spoke of Michelle often and seemed entirely devoted to her. Michelle lived in Northern California, and since neither sister was wealthy, They primarily kept in touch by phone. Giselle managed to visit Michelle twice in the 3 months between when we met and when we married. Our wedding was intimate, as Giselle and I had to cover the costs ourselves. There were perhaps only 30 guests. My brother Kent stood as my best man and took an immediate liking to Giselle from the moment they met. He repeatedly mentioned in the days leading up to the wedding that I was fortunate. Michelle acted as Giselle's maid of honor. I only saw her briefly over the wedding weekend, as she and Giselle spent most of their time together, enjoying their sisterly rituals. There were no elaborate pre-wedding parties, and Giselle and I departed directly for our honeymoon after a modest reception. I was somewhat puzzled when I finally met Michelle. She wore thick glasses and had a noticeable, lazy look that was not visible in her photographs. Giselle mentioned her poor eyesight. She couldn't drive a car, but I didn't realize it until we met. Despite their resemblance in sunglasses, Michelle was not as attractive as usual and weighed about 15 pounds more than Giselle's slender figure. Our honeymoon in Aruba was incredible, and Giselle's willingness to reach new heights. She was open to any action I desired, anywhere. We made love twice a day, and Giselle showed great gratitude for every moment, no matter where it happened. Shortly after returning from my honeymoon, I discovered some facts about Giselle that had been hidden. As a CIA analyst, I should have been very suspicious of the fact that Giselle moved in with me after we had known each other for only 6 weeks, and it would seem that she was not worried about terminating the apartment lease. She admitted that she had been working month after month and could leave at any time, as she was close to eviction due to unpaid rent. I was also amazed by the amount of debt Giselle had accumulated on credit cards and student loans. Despite her college education, she had difficulty managing credit cards. I had no idea that she had paid for Michelle's entire trip to Washington, D.C. flight, accommodation, taxi, meals, everything else. Given Giselle's financial situation, I decided to split our finances shortly after we got married. I gave her a low-limit credit card, which I followed closely. We worked hard to pay off her debts and student loans, although progress was slow, especially because she insisted on visiting Michelle every couple of months, which was cheaper than bringing her to Washington. Despite the financial difficulties, I was happy in our marriage because Giselle was always there for me emotionally and physically. Our intimate moments were incredibly satisfying, and she loved hugging and expressing her affection. Unexpectedly, a few months after our wedding, my brother Kent found a job in the District of Columbia and moved to live closer to our apartment in Northern Virginia. He often visited us and enjoyed our hospitality. Giselle was kind to him, and I appreciated the way she welcomed him into our new family. We faced a serious problem when Giselle's loan repayment, which I didn't know about, came about 6 months after our wedding. The bank that provided the loan threatened to sue. Around the same time, Giselle's office cut her working hours due to budget cuts. At least that's what she claimed. I suspected it was because of her frequent absences from Michelle. Giselle and I have discussed our financial situation several times. Although she expressed regret, she never actively contributed to the search for a solution, except that she tried to please me by hugging me, batting her eyelashes, and allowing me to have intimacy with her. When the bank actually took legal action, I realized I needed to take extreme measures. An undisclosed corporation, due to a confidentiality agreement, whose former CEO, jokingly dubbed Darth Vader before his infamous vice presidency stint, I hope I didn't reveal too much, urgently sought analysts for Iraq. Former employees of this corporation were highly valued. I interviewed with them and was offered a position paying 4 times my current salary at the company, doing similar work. The catch was that it required relocating to Iraq. Giselle and I had numerous heartfelt discussions about it. She reassured me our relationship could endure, especially with the perk of 2 weeks of paid R&R every 4 months, which allowed me to fly her anywhere in the world. I resigned from the company, joined the corporation, and persuaded the bank to suspend the lawsuit by agreeing to direct a portion of my salary toward paying off Giselle's loan. The work in Iraq was extremely difficult. Although it included analytical tasks similar to what I did in my previous job, I was working in a dangerous area. When I left the building where I lived and worked, I needed an armed escort, and I felt uneasy about the consequences of my job, which seemed to benefit the evil corporation financially in the first place, rather than having a positive impact on the Iraqi people or American taxpayers. Fortunately, I corresponded with Giselle daily by email and spoke with her weekly on the phone. It gave me some emotional support, but also increased my longing for her physical presence and closeness. The first 2 weeks of working with Giselle were amazing. We spent time in Hawaii, allowing ourselves whatever we wanted, dining where we liked, and passionately enjoying each other's company. By the time we parted ways, she returned to Virginia and I to Iraq. We were both exhausted and satisfied. In just 5 months, Evil Corp. She promoted me, increasing my salary 6 times compared to my previous job at the company. The additional income, which was completely tax-free, was credited to an account in the Cayman Islands. Despite the financial benefits, the working and living conditions remained unpleasant. During my second 2-week break with Giselle, after 8 months of working in Iraq, things started to get weird. We met in Athens and visited all the Greek islands. For the first 2 days of our stay in Athens, Giselle seemed restrained, but as soon as we got to Rhodes, she returned to her usual desire to be intimate anywhere, anytime, and in any way. I attributed her initial behavior to jet lag or a general sense of anxiety, instead of methodically analyzing it, as it would be in my job. On our last day in Mykonos, the final stop of our trip, we spent the whole day in bed. Between the 8th and 12th months of my stay in Iraq, I began to notice some oddities in Giselle's emails. When I mentioned this during our phone conversations, she laughed it off. From time to time during our conversations that took place in Virginia in the morning, she would suddenly stop talking, claiming that she might have the flu or was suffering from severe allergies, and would often be interrupted by sounds indicating that she was vomiting before returning to the conversation. As my third R&R trip approached, Giselle suggested I return home to Virginia for it, which coincidentally I had been considering myself. Our financial situation had significantly improved thanks to my additional income, allowing us to pay off nearly all of Giselle's debt, and I now had over $50,000 in my Cayman account. When I arrived at Dulles Airport, instead of Giselle, my father greeted me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I asked, taken aback. "Hi, Jimmy," he replied with a smile, though his eyes held a strange expression as he hugged me. "Mom and I decided to visit and surprise you. Giselle, Mom, and Brett are waiting at your apartment." During our ride home, Dad seemed unusually reserved. At times, it seemed like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Perhaps I didn't pay close enough attention because in hindsight, he appeared nervous, almost panicked. However, I was eager to see Giselle and disappointed that others would be present, preventing us from being alone. Upon reaching the apartment, Mom, Brett, and Giselle all wore peculiar expressions. When Giselle stood up, it became apparent she was dressed in maternity clothes, which completely shocked me. The subsequent conversation remains hazy in my memory. I recall sitting down while Brett spoke, occasionally interrupted by Mom with comforting words, as Giselle sat in tears. Though I can't recall the exact words, amidst the confusion of realizing Giselle was more than 6 months pregnant, despite seeing her just 4 to 8 months earlier, I grasped the gist of their message. Giselle was pregnant with Brett's child. "It wasn't planned," my mother reassured me, "and everyone is upset about it. But they insisted we needed to discuss it openly. And that brings us to the beginning of this story." Dizzy and muttering, "No, absolutely not," I stood, and then everything went black. According to Mom, I woke up in the hospital after collapsing and injuring my nose, left cheekbone, and more. When I woke up in the hospital, my mother was the only person there, tears streaming down her face. The moment she noticed I was awake, she exclaimed, "Oh, Jimmy, darling, I'm so relieved to see your eyes open. Let me call Dad, Brett, and Giselle to come over. They've been eager to see you as soon as you woke." "Just hold on a moment, Mom," I murmured, struggling to speak clearly. "How long have I been here?" Well, you had a concussion and were drifting in and out of consciousness, so you've been here overnight. It's now about 8 in the morning the day after your plane landed, she explained. Have you been up all night? I asked, noticing her tired eyes. Yes, darling, I've been worried sick, especially after the upsetting news we had to tell you, she replied, squeezing my hand. Mom, please don't call anyone else yet, I pleaded. Just then, a female doctor and nurse entered the room. Mr. Quayle, I'm Dr. Jacobs, and this is Nurse Thomas. The doctor introduced herself, shaking my hand before starting to examine me with various instruments. After a few minutes, she continued, I'm delighted to see you awake. We were concerned, but seeing you alert now suggests that with a few days' rest, you'll be fine. Thank you, doctor, I said. There's something I need to discuss with you privately. Mom, could you please go to the cafeteria, have some breakfast, and come back in an hour? And please, do not, under any circumstances, call Dad, Brett, or my ex-brother and ex-wife. I could see that she was deeply affected by the mention of her ex. She gasped involuntarily and began to speak, but I interrupted her. If you care about me at all, you'll follow my instructions and then we can talk more. Okay, Jimmy, she weakly replied as she left the room, looking crestfallen. The doctor and nurse looked surprised. Dr. Jacobs, what exactly is the extent of the damage to my face? You'll need plastic surgery on your nose and left cheek, she answered. We have a doctor-patient relationship, so neither you nor Nurse Thomas can disclose anything we discuss without my permission, correct? Yes, that's correct, they both affirmed, nodding. Since I have to undergo surgery anyway, can I use it to alter my appearance? Yes, if that's what you really want, though it's not necessary, the doctor started before I interrupted. Great. Can you recommend the best plastic surgeon in this area for an appearance change? Yes, she replied, then turned to Nurse Thomas. Gloria, could you go to the reception desk and retrieve Dr. Simon Kent's office address and phone number from the computer? Sure, I'll be right back, Nurse Thomas replied. After she left, I had more questions for Dr. Jacobs. I asked, Is there any disadvantage to me leaving the hospital immediately? I strongly advise you to stay another night. There's a risk of fainting, which could be disastrous, she replied, looking very concerned. Is there a possibility of being moved to a different room, one where the staff won't disclose my location? If that can be arranged, I'll stay. Otherwise, I'm leaving now, regardless of the risk, I informed her. She checked my chart. I see you have excellent health insurance. Yeah, Evil Corp. Does provide good benefits, I chuckled. I could transfer you to the secure wing. I can justify it. There, you can decline visitors and the area is strictly controlled, she offered. Can this be done before my mother returns? I inquired. I believe so, she assured me. She dialed from my room phone, issued some instructions, and hung up. An orderly will arrive in 10 minutes. Just then, Nurse Thomas entered with the plastic surgeon's contact information. Thankfully, my wallet, phone, and other essentials were in a fanny pack that I had with me at the hospital. I stored Dr. Kent's details in there and expressed gratitude to the doctor and nurse. True to her word, I was relocated to the secure wing and, as I insisted, received no visitors. I opted to remain in the hospital for an additional 2 nights to ensure I would be completely functional upon discharge. It also served as a secure refuge, especially since Evil Corp was footing the bill, sparing me any concerns about expenses. By the afternoon of the first day I regained consciousness, I could engage my analyst mode and begin planning my next moves with clarity. Despite experiencing the most intense emotional pain of my life, I managed to temporarily suppress it because I was driven by a mission: to free myself from my miserable circumstances and seek vengeance against my former brother and soon-to-be ex-wife. I had 11 more days before I needed to interact with anyone at Evil Corp. By then, I planned to resign or wrap up a few projects if I could handle them in the U.S. instead of Iraq, and set most of my plans in motion. I booked a hotel room and, thanks to Dr. Jacobs, secured an urgent appointment with Dr. Kent. After a thorough examination, He assured me he could restore me to my former self, or significantly alter my appearance. After reviewing various examples, I chose a face that appealed to me, aiming to retain a certain cuteness while looking quite different. Surgery was scheduled for the next day. Dr. Kent couldn't promise an exact replica of the face I'd chosen, but assured me it would be very similar and certainly cute. I spent the night in the hospital after the surgery and returned to my hotel room the next day. It was only after my surgery that I checked my cell phone. There were numerous messages, mostly from my parents, and 2 each from Brett and Giselle. They all wanted to know if I was okay and wanted to talk. My mom's last message sounded frantic. Despite my displeasure at the thought of them being at my apartment with the cheaters, I could understand my mom's desire to console me and prevent conflict among her children, so I called her cell phone. "Hi, Mom, it's Jimmy," I said. Her eyes welled up with tears as she exclaimed, "Where are you, darling? I've been so worried. I thought maybe the CIA had taken you or something terrible had happened." I interrupted her gently. "Mom, it's nothing like that. I just needed to make sure I didn't run into Brett or Giselle because things could have gotten ugly." "Oh, darling. Mom, please just listen. I'm okay. I'm staying at a hotel for a few days to clear my head. I'll see you before I leave." "Oh, where are you staying? I could come over," she pleaded. "I'm at the Key Bridge Marriott, room 1412, but please don't come now. I'll let you know when it's safe. And Mom, it's crucial you don't tell Dad, Brett, or Giselle where I am. Do you understand?" "But Jimmy, they're worried about you. They want to help," she started. "Stop. Promise me you won't tell them. Brett and Giselle are out of my life, and if you tell them where I am, it'll be the same for you and Dad. Do you understand?" "Okay, Jimmy," she sobbed quietly. "I'll call you in a couple of days," I assured her before hanging up. The following day, I rendezvoused with a friend from the CIA, whom I'll call Jay, at a bench in Tyson's Corner Mall. Jay worked in covert ops and was, in my opinion, a bit eccentric, though that might be par for the course in that line of work. He appreciated me because, during my tenure at the company, I had provided him with critical analysis that he believed had saved his life. Given his stoicism, I trusted his assessment. In any case, Jay felt indebted to me. What I needed from him was a new identity, to be arranged once the bandages from my recent facial reconstruction were removed and my appearance settled into something less conspicuous. Specifically, I required a passport, a new social security number, and a fabricated background. "You're asking for quite a bit, Jimmy," Jay replied, taking a drag on his cigarette. "But not more than your life is worth, right?" I replied jokingly. He grinned. "Since you're not in a rush, say, a month?" I nodded, and he continued. "I think I can manage something. Give me a list of potential names and birth dates." "I'm ahead of you on that, Jay," I chuckled, handing him a piece of paper. He glanced at it briefly, tucked it into his jacket, extinguished his cigarette, and retrieved a burner phone from his pocket. "Check this daily around 5 in the evening, Jimmy. I'll let you know where to meet for a photo shoot and when everything's ready." "I really appreciate this," I said. "What's the cost?" "I can arrange a discount through a favor. How about $10,000 for my guy, not me," he replied. "Sure. Do you need it now?" I asked. "No, cash on delivery of the documents." We shook hands, and Jay disappeared into the bustling mall crowd. The following afternoon, I was in my hotel room with my newly bought laptop, entering details about my future plans, when there came a knock at the door. Assuming it was room service delivering an afternoon snack, since I seldom ventured out with my face fully bandaged, I opened it without bothering to look through the peephole. To my dismay, it was my damn ex-brother. He seemed startled by my appearance, given my completely covered and unrecognizable new face. Mistaking me for someone else, he began. "Jimmy, I know you probably hate me now, but we really need to talk this through. I don't want—" That's as far as he got. Clearly caught off guard, he didn't expect what came next. I struck him as hard as I could, right in the solar plexus. Although my background was merely as an analyst, hanging around ex-military types in Iraq had imparted some basic self-defense, or rather offense, skills in my spare time. It wasn't much, but it was more than enough for an unsuspecting civilian like Brett. Brett crumpled to the floor, not knocked out, but writhing in agony and unable to move. I seized him by the hair, dragged him into my room, shut the door, and then delivered a swift kick as hard as I could to his groin. The first one hit dead on. Although he instinctively shielded himself for the next two, they still looked excruciatingly painful. I gathered my laptop and the few belongings I had packed, stowed them in my newly purchased backpack, and promptly checked out of the hotel, leaving Brett wheezing and in torment on the floor of my room. The incident necessitated a slight adjustment to my plans. I promptly contacted my local liaison at Evil Corp and met with him. I informed him of my intention to resign, but proposed that if they provided me with a $25,000 bonus, my regular salary, and a safe haven for a month, I would complete the remaining 2 projects I was handling. He attempted to dissuade me from resigning, suggesting I proceed with the work at my usual rate without a bonus. However, understanding the project's significance to Evil Corp, I stood firm. Eventually, he acquiesced. Once my bonus and advance pay were deposited into my Cayman Islands account, and I had access to one of Evil Corp's safe houses in the area, I began working on the projects. A week later, when I checked the phone Jay had given me, there was a message waiting. It read, "Meet me at our usual spot tomorrow at noon. Don't bring anything." Arriving at our favorite bench, Jay was already seated. "What's going on?" I asked. "Here's the deal. Good news or bad news first?" he replied. "Let's start with the bad," I said hesitantly. "Even with all my connections, I can't pull it off for less than $20,000, he explained. "Whoa," I exclaimed. "Okay. What's the good news then?" "The good news is, if you're okay with being just and ready, I can get you flawless papers and a background so clean that not even someone as skilled as you could uncover the truth. Your fingerprints and DNA will even be in Justin Reddy's file at the FBI, not yours," he said with a mischievous grin. "Hey, I'm Justin Reddy," I joked, shaking Jay's hand. "Are you serious?" Jay fist-bumped me, chuckling. "It's incredible, right? I was aiming for 80% cover, but this is practically bulletproof. Just follow the routine we discussed, check every day around 5 p.m. for details on the photo session, documents, and money transfer." With that, he took a DNA sample and closed the container, saying, "Same as last time. Stay tuned for the specifics." Within 3 weeks, I had received my new set of identity documents, a comprehensive dossier detailing Justin Reddy's background, and finished my assignments for Evil Corp. I felt gratified when Jay, who had been present during the $20,000 exchange for my documents, didn't recognize me until I spoke. Not only had I significantly altered my appearance with natural-looking blonde highlights in my brown hair and brown contact lenses over my blue eyes, but my facial features were also changed enough to evade Jay's notice. If someone as observant as Jay failed to recognize me, I was confident no one else would either. Before leaving the D.C. area, I used the burner phone Jay had given me to call my mother on her cell. "Mom, I can't believe you told Brett where I was." "I guess you've chosen sides," I began. "Jimmy." "Oh, Jimmy, thank you for calling. I really didn't want to say anything, but Dad convinced me Brett needed to know so we could sort things out, without tearing the family apart. You didn't have to hurt him so badly, "I don't care about that guy," I interrupted, my use of profanity shocking her as I rarely swore around my mother. "The family is done." I called for 3 reasons. First, I'm cutting off all contact with you, Dad, that guy, and the other woman. Second, tell her to file for divorce due to abandonment. I took what little was left in our joint account anyway. And third, tell her I wish her the worst life possible. With that, I hung up, removed and destroyed the burner phone SIM card, and responsibly recycled the device at a Radio Shack. Upon arriving in San Francisco a day later under the guise of Justin Reddy, I had around $60,000 deposited in a bank account under Justin's name, a highly secure laptop, a business plan, and a personal agenda. My priorities were clear. First, I secured a budget-friendly apartment in a similarly economical office space boasting excellent internet connectivity. This office happened to be where Giselle's sister Michelle both lived and worked. Why was I interested in Michelle's whereabouts? It was a crucial part of my revenge plan. It was something I never thought I'd be capable of a few years ago. But my resentment towards Giselle and Brett ran deep enough to drive me. At this point, my twisted goal was to inflict maximum misery upon them, and in my warped mind, the most effective strategy, until I amassed significant wealth, involved manipulating Michelle into falling for me, only to discard her, perhaps repeatedly. The emotional turmoil inflicted upon Giselle by her distressed sister mattered little to me. My business plan began to yield impressive results. I offered to conduct complimentary introductory research projects for companies in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, analyzing their data. The subject matter was irrelevant to me, as my experience with the company and Evil Corp had equipped me to handle a wide range of data types. 90% of the companies that accepted my introductory offer eventually became paying clients. Within 8 months, my workload had grown significantly, commanding a high hourly rate with minimal overhead. By the end of the first year, I was employing part-time college students to assist, which became a lucrative aspect of my business. I was well on my way to achieving my financial objectives. Within 10 months, I had gained substantial insight into Michelle's activities as well. She led a relatively quiet life, working as a restaurant hostess and maintaining a low-key weekend routine, occasionally seen with a date. Her lazy eye and poor eyesight seemed to limit her activities. There was one change in her routine that made her more accessible. She joined a health club. I also joined the same health club. I aimed to encourage Michelle to prioritize the health club in her routine, so I introduced myself, engaged her in conversation, and complimented her commitment. Initially, she was somewhat distant. I suspected she might have recognized me from a brief encounter over a year ago, despite her poor eyesight and my changed appearance. By our 4th session together, her demeanor had completely shifted and she became friendly. Winning over Michelle wasn't overly challenging. Being more attractive and intelligent than any previous suitor, once she began interacting warmly with me, it was evident she was quickly developing feelings. My initial intention was to take my time with Michelle. However, as I devoted all my time to developing my business and coordinating our schedules, I found myself increasingly striving for physical relaxation. While I was looking for casual contacts, I struggled to find enough time to achieve a high level of success. One weekend, when Giselle was visiting Michelle, a situation I wanted to avoid, I hired an expensive call girl. My dissatisfaction with Giselle made itself felt again, prompting me to seek help from a call girl. Her name was Tammy, and even though the weekend cost $3,000, she was worth every dollar. A week after Giselle left, I asked Michelle out on a date, choosing a Sunday daytime outing. Given her poor eyesight, attending a live performance wasn't feasible, but there were plenty of other activities to enjoy. We opted for a boat ride, had a picnic on an island, visited an amusement park, and had a casual dinner. When I kissed her goodnight, she seemed enthusiastic and raved about what a great time she had. Throughout the date, I made sure to cater to what I knew most women appreciated. It seemed to work, as evidenced by Michelle's admiring glances at the health club the following Tuesday after our Sunday outing. Michelle's slight eye condition and thick glasses meant she wouldn't be mistaken for a conventionally beautiful woman. However, she had a quite attractive figure, and by our first date, it was clear she was improving it. Since starting at the health club, she had lost at least 5 pounds where she wanted to, and if she lost another 10, most guys would find her body excellent. When I realized that I was burning with desire chatting with Michelle on the Wednesday after our date, I abandoned my plan to move slowly and decided that it was time to engage in intimacy with her. That Sunday, we went on another pleasant date, including a late lunch. Neither of us was particularly hungry at dinner, so I invited her to my house for a snack. She readily agreed. Once inside, I clarified my intentions. "Michelle, I misled you to lure you here," I confessed, taking off her glasses a few moments after I closed the apartment door. "The snack I want is you." Her reaction to this and subsequent advances was uncertain, but it didn't matter. I laid her on my bed, and the whole process began. Michelle was in no condition to leave after our first meeting, and did not show the slightest desire to do so. The next morning, after we both finished in the bathroom and then took a shower together, she looked at me with her unusual lazy gaze and giggled. "Thanks, Justin. It was the most amazing night of my life, although it may be difficult for me to walk today." "I should be thanking you," I replied. "You're great." Having said that, I realized that I was being sincere. Despite my initial intentions, I enjoyed it immensely. She blushed and lowered her eyes before saying, "I'm really glad you had a good time, because I've never really considered myself attractive. However, there is only one problem." I'm not sure how to say it." "Then just say it," I grinned, "or I'll drag you back to bed." She blushed even more and stammered, choosing her words. "Well, I don't have much bed experience, I don't take birth control, and I'm worried about getting pregnant." I interrupted her. "I can stop by the pharmacy with you on my way to work, and you can get a plan B." She looked puzzled. "What is our plan B?" I grinned, at first thinking she was joking. Seeing her continued confusion, I explained, "This is a pill that can be taken after intimacy to prevent pregnancy. You can buy it at any pharmacy. I'll even go with you and pay the expenses if you want." "Are you really going to do this?" "What is it?" she asked nervously. I nodded and we walked together. On Tuesday, we both smiled when we saw each other at the gym. I asked if we could finish our lesson a little earlier because I wanted to discuss something with her. She agreed without hesitation. After our workout, we headed to my car and sat together in the front seat. "Michelle, I really enjoyed our time together Sunday night. I'd like us to make it a regular thing in the future. Are you okay with that?" "Oh, yes," she blurted out, then blushed and asked quietly, "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm suggesting you spend the night with me 3 or 4 times a week. I know you have a roommate and I don't want to cause any issues there. Also, I'd like you to see a doctor and get on birth control pills," I said promptly. "I'd love that, but do you know if those pills are expensive?" "I'm not sure because I always used protection before our meeting on Sunday evening and my work insurance policy does not apply to them." "No problem. Just bring me the prescription and I'll take care of getting them for you." "Do you want intimacy with me enough to do this?" "What is it?" she asked in surprise. "Can't you tell me how much I enjoyed Sunday?" I asked. Actually, I'm embarrassed, Justin. But I was so out of my mind after you treated me like that I didn't notice anything else. I'm sorry." I laughed. "It's all right. Let me just tell you, I really liked it." This marked the beginning of our ongoing relationship. Although I looked for other partners from time to time, I focused more and more on Michelle, and after about a month when we were close 3 or 4 times a week, I realized that she was full of enthusiasm and completely devoted to me. I was having a lot of fun. In the beginning of my relationship with Michelle, I contacted a lawyer I knew from Virginia. I asked her to look into Jimmy Quayle's divorce status from Giselle and gather any other available information. The following day, she informed me that the divorce had been finalized approximately 6 weeks earlier. Shortly after, Giselle married my unpleasant brother, Brett Quayle. It turns out that Giselle had a baby boy about a year before that. As expected, the divorce terms, based on abandonment and with Giselle not seeking child support, quite generous of her, wasn't it, dictated that Giselle received all remaining marital assets except for half of a savings account, which was held in trust by Giselle's attorney. If unclaimed within a year, it would revert to Giselle. Despite its relatively small sum, I was adamant she shouldn't get it. So I signed a power of attorney as Jimmy Quayle, instructed my lawyer to retrieve the money, deduct her fees, and donate the remainder to the Red Cross. After 2 months of regularly being intimate with Michelle, I encountered a dilemma. I was aware of her deepening feelings for me, having confided in Giselle about it extensively. By now, Giselle had become emotionally invested in my relationship with Michelle, which meant I was on track to achieve my goal of hurting Giselle when I eventually ended things with Michelle. However, I wasn't ready to break up with her yet, and I was beginning to see Michelle more as an unwitting victim. Moreover, Michelle's consistent workouts with me at the gym had transformed her physique. She was no longer overweight, thankfully not too thin either, and her thighs were now well-toned. Her body was undeniably attractive. After wrestling with this dilemma, I decided that what would ease my conscience was to give Michelle a genuine gift that would help her recover when the time came for me to end the relationship. By then, my financial situation had improved significantly, allowing me to afford what I had in mind. I researched several eye surgeons and found Dr. Noyes in Pacific Heights, who not only came highly recommended, but also claimed to have developed a technique for successfully treating lazy eye in adults, something other surgeons had deemed impractical or impossible. I brought Michelle along to meet Dr. Noyes. After nearly an hour-long examination of Michelle by Dr. Noyes and his team, he met with us to discuss his findings. Michelle's left eye condition is quite severe due to its laziness. Additionally, her right eye lacks sufficient strength to compensate, resulting in her poor vision. The positive aspect is that I can easily correct the issue in her right eye and substantially improve the appearance of her left eye. Unfortunately, there's only about a 30% chance that her left eye will achieve near normal vision after the operation, which can only be performed once. I found this somewhat reassuring. Glancing at Michelle, I noticed tears in her eyes. "What will the cost be? And when can you schedule the procedure?" I asked next. "The cost is $25,000. You can discuss scheduling with my receptionist. Plan for a procedure that may take up to 2.5 hours. I should have availability within 2 to 3 weeks, typically on Wednesdays and Thursdays, which are my usual surgical days," replied Dr. Noyes. "Following the operation, Michelle will need 4 days of bed rest with eye bandages, followed by an additional 2 days avoiding sunlight," he continued. Anticipating my concerns, he added, "And during the days of bed rest, no physical activity of any kind." Michelle appeared visibly upset. I expressed heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Noyes, and Michelle nodded in acknowledgement as we left his office. When settling the bill, I inquired with the receptionist about scheduling a 2.5-hour surgery. After consulting her schedule, she informed me of 2 options: Wednesday, 2 weeks from tomorrow at 8 a.m., or 3 weeks from this Thursday at 11 a.m. She emphasized the need for a decision by tomorrow and required a $10,000 advance payment from the doctor. I thanked the receptionist, and we departed. Michelle remained silent as we walked to the car, but once inside, she began yelling at me for the first time in our relationship. "How could you be so cruel," she cried, "to bring me there and give me hope that my condition could improve, when there's no way I can afford that surgery? I would have rather not known about it. I've learned to accept my limitations." She sobbed uncontrollably, hands covering her face. I gently took hold of her wrists, holding her hands at her sides. "You are having the surgery, and I'm covering the costs. So stop crying and arrange for time off work for the operation and recovery." I let go of her hands, started the car, and drove away. Soon, Michelle's tears dried up, but she remained silent until we reached her house. "It looks like this is your stop," I said with a note of amusement in my voice. "Justin, I'm sorry for yelling at you and saying what I did. But I can't accept that you're paying for the surgery. I just can't." "You have no choice," I replied firmly. "If you don't have surgery, I won't touch you anymore. And believe me, I'm serious." I was surprised myself by what I said next. Words that seemed to come from the depths of my soul and not from any conscious thought. I want everyone else to see how beautiful you are, and your current appearance is holding you back." This statement shocked both of us, but I quickly added, "By the time I pick you up at my house tomorrow, you will have to check with the administrator about your work schedule and choose the most appropriate time." Michelle was speechless. I couldn't tell if she was pleased and hiding it behind shock, or if she was angry. Anyway, she silently got out of the car and, without looking back, entered her apartment. When I was driving back to work, my head was in a mess. My mind clung to the idea of a gift to alleviate the guilt before I left her and came face to face with Giselle, but deep down I doubted if I really wanted a real relationship with Michelle and if there was another way to settle accounts with Giselle. When I picked Michelle up for one of our scheduled dates on Wednesday evening after her shift, she greeted me with a smile. "So, did you manage to get time off for the procedure and recovery?" I asked, keeping a serious expression on my face. "I still can't believe you decided to do this, but yes, I did it. If you don't mind, we can make an appointment in 3 weeks, starting tomorrow." "Just know one thing," she chuckled. "What is it?" I asked. "I'll do everything in my power to wear you down so you may need another operation in the future," she teased, and then, after a pause, giggled. "I'll take a chance," I replied. That night, Michelle really tried to wear me down. The next morning, I was completely exhausted. When I walked from the bedroom into the living area of my apartment the next morning as we were preparing to leave, I noticed her swiftly moving something from beneath her dress and placing it in her overnight bag. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," she blushed. "Let me see," I joked. No, it's private," she resisted, attempting to pull her overnight bag away. I seized the bag and held it above her reach while she protested and tried to reclaim it. In the midst of the struggle, I reached into my bag and pulled out a purple device that looked like an adult toy. Holding it up, I stopped Michelle in her tracks. "What's this?" I chuckled. With a crimson face and a deeply embarrassed expression, she replied, "It's called the Kegel Master. It's an exercise device that helps strengthen pelvic floor muscles. I want to improve in bed for you." I returned the Kegel machine to her, gave her the bag, and calmly remarked, "It's working." Holding her hand, we left together. Later that day, I scheduled an operation for Dr. Noyes and sent them a $10,000 deposit. I was euphoric when Michelle continued her attempts to give me great pleasure over the next 2 weeks. She even asked me to move in with her until after my surgery, after which she planned to return to her apartment. I readily agreed. Her diligent Kegel exercises on the Kegel Master simulator brought me such satisfaction that thoughts of Giselle's revenge almost flew out of my head. And then, everything went wrong. After an incredibly memorable meeting when we were sitting facing each other, Michelle made a stunning impression when we lay next to each other, holding our breath and smiling. While my roommate Katie is helping me recover from eye surgery, I will need additional help, so my sister Giselle will come to visit me with her 16-month-old son James. She can't wait to meet you too. "What?" I blurted out, struggling to realize that Giselle, whom I didn't have much respect for, had named her son after me. "Wouldn't you like to meet Giselle?" Michelle asked shyly. We had a tense conversation for the next few minutes. It was impossible to say no directly, but I wasn't thrilled about it. Despite the fact that after daily training with Michelle, my appearance and physique have changed significantly. So much so that I am not so easy to recognize. My voice and perhaps some inconspicuous manners can still give me away. While I was thinking about it, Michelle offered me an even worse idea. "I was wondering, Justin, if you could rent a bed and a baby cot so that Giselle can stay with you in the living room of your apartment. My roommate can help in emergencies at night, but our apartment is too small to accommodate them." "How about staying at a hotel instead?" I answered quickly. "Both she and I would be very grateful if you would let her stay here. Please, Justin. This is only for the day of the operation and 4 days after it. As soon as the sunlight becomes my only concern, she will leave, and I will come back here to you, if you agree." After I made love to Michelle again, she immediately fell asleep. I lay awake most of the night. While still pondering how to prevent my troubled ex-wife from staying in my apartment the day and 4 days after Michelle's surgery, I needed a backup plan in case of the worst-case scenario. I instructed Judy, a college student who worked for me part-time, to study a way to temporarily change my voice. To my surprise, she found a solution within a couple of hours. "Justin, there is a technique where doctors put cotton swabs in your nasal passages. This can improve the quality of your voice by 10–20% with minimal complications if the cylinders are removed within a week," explained Judy. "Make an appointment with Dr. Phillips immediately," I ordered impatiently. Meanwhile, I tried my best to dissuade Michelle from her idea of keeping Giselle with me. Every time I objected, she distracted me and called me to bed. The Kegel machine must be one of the greatest inventions in history, because it seemed that the muscles of her pelvic floor were strengthening every day, enhancing our already good intimacy. 2 days after Judy's report, I found myself in Dr. Phillips's office. She explained the theory behind her technique, played 3 tapes of what she claimed were typical before and after voices, and estimated the cost. This would vary depending on the best type of cylinders for my specific passages. Cotton wasn't always optimal, sometimes necessitating more expensive materials that were harder to insert and remove. I arranged to undergo the procedure the day before Giselle was due to arrive, and to have it reversed 6 days later. My initial anxiety was eased by 2 factors. Firstly, Michelle didn't recognize my voice over the phone after the procedure. Following Dr. Phillips's advice, I attributed it to allergies. Secondly, Michelle was incredibly excited about her impending operation, akin to a child anticipating Halloween, Christmas, and a birthday party all rolled into one. I resigned myself to enduring my ex-wife's company for 4 or 5 nights, devising plans to minimize my presence around her and her child as much as possible. On that decisive Thursday, I accompanied Michelle to the hospital. My ex-wife was flying in and planning to take a cab from the airport to Michelle's apartment, where her roommate Kathy would be waiting. I stayed at the hospital until Michelle was out of the recovery room and then took her home. After spending an hour with Michelle, her roommate Kathy, my ex-wife, and our child, I was shocked that Giselle showed no recognition of me whatsoever. Michelle was exhausted from the surgery, so after sharing some Chinese food, Giselle, James, and I went to my apartment, leaving Michelle with Kathy. The plan was to drop Giselle off at Michelle's apartment around 8:30 a.m., when Kathy would leave for work. During our conversation, Giselle casually mentioned to Kathy and me, and later to Michelle, that she had recently stopped taking birth control because she and Brett wanted to try for another child once she returned. "I'll be really in the mood since Brett's been away for 10 days and I'll be here for 4, so we better be ready for some intense action." Michelle chuckled, and I did too, though I could tell it was too much information for Kathy to handle. By the time we reached my apartment, all of us were exhausted, so I didn't have to interact much with Giselle and James before we went to bed. My living room was spacious and minimally furnished, with enough space for a twin bed for Giselle and a small crib for James. As I lay in bed with Giselle and James in the next room, a small idea began to form in my mind while Giselle spoke about her desires. This idea soon evolved into a sinister plan. It seemed like the perfect revenge. I was confident I could execute it, especially since Giselle had shown herself to be promiscuous and had been giving me suggestive looks ever since we met. I had concluded they were not looks of recognition, but of admiration. The next day, after dropping Giselle and James off at Michelle's apartment, I went out and bought several hidden cameras and photography backdrops. Back in my room, I arranged the cameras around my bed and adorned it with new bright red sheets, a stark contrast to my usual white ones. I dismantled the headboard and stowed it away in my closet. I was amazed at how easily I could influence Giselle. On the second night of Michelle's recovery from bed rest, I suggested we go out for drinks to celebrate Michelle's new chapter. I assured her I had a neighbor willing to watch James, and she agreed without hesitation. Being pleasant to Giselle that night was tough, but knowing my plans made it bearable. She got drunk willingly, without my prodding, and shared some intriguing thoughts. The most striking was her confession, though her speech was slurred. My biggest regret is mistreating my ex-husband. I should have resisted his brother's advances and fought harder to keep our marriage intact. Despite objections from my current husband, I named my son after him because I loved him the most. I wish I could have spoken to him privately before our divorce, but he left in anger, and I never saw him again. At least I know he's alive, as he recently claimed the money held in escrow by the court. I feigned sympathy. Although her words brought some comfort, they did not change in the slightest what I intended to do. I wanted to take revenge on both her and my despicable ex-brother. As soon as I brought Giselle to my house and settled her with a babysitter, she was so drunk that she threw off her outerwear right in front of me. Whether it was intentional or not, it made me feel better. I started kissing her. At first, she barely resisted, but then revealed her true nature, saying, "You need to use protective equipment because Brett and I are planning to have another child." "No problem," I replied calmly. I took out the protection I bought specifically for this moment from the drawer. She smiled. I took her to my bedroom. She didn't seem to pay attention to the set for the photo shoot and the unusually bright light in the bedroom, except that she asked, "Aren't you going to turn off the lights?" I replied, "No, I want to see you completely while we do important things." It seemed to satisfy her. I deliberately left the door to my room open so that she would wake up little James with her sounds. I was sure that anyone watching the DVD I was recording would hear the child's screams in the background, which perfectly matched my plan. When I finished the first round, I went out and calmed James down, and after that I closed our door. Yes, Manes had 3 rounds that night. Then I took a shower. By the time she woke up the next morning with a severe hangover, the photo screens had been removed, the red sheets had been replaced, and I was completely carefree. After breakfast, she tried to kiss me, but I playfully pushed her away. "Hey, Giselle, you don't want Michelle to get mad at me for kissing you, do you?" "After last night, do you care about the kiss?" she asked, puzzled. "Last night? What about last night?" I feigned surprise. Giselle was genuinely surprised. "Why, after you slept with me last night?" she retorted. "What? Are you kidding? After I helped you escape from that guy who molested you at the bar, I just put you to bed," I explained. "You must have dreamed about him." She paused and then asked, "Then why does everything hurt?" "Giselle, if you dreamed that we were close, please don't tell Michelle. I don't want her to think there's any chance of that at all," I said firmly. "No, that's not what I dreamed," she snapped. In my heart, I chuckled to myself as we drove in silence to Michelle's apartment that morning. Later that evening, I mentally congratulated myself when I heard Giselle telling Michelle that the day I was with her, she didn't have red days. I managed to avoid spending too much time alone with Giselle over the next 2 nights. Soon after, Michelle tearfully said goodbye to her when Dr. Noyes made a rare house call to remove her bandages, ensuring she wouldn't be exposed to sunlight. On the final night, I even drove Giselle to the airport and gave her and James quick goodbye hugs, hoping she wasn't carrying my child. Dr. Noyes' surgery significantly improved Michelle's left eye cosmetically, making it nearly normal looking unless one knew there had been an issue. I hadn't anticipated how much it would enhance her appearance. Now, her face was beautiful. Dr. Noyes informed us that her right eye's vision should be corrected to 20/30, the best achievable after 2 days without sunlight. It would take at least a month to see if her left eye would reach 20/40, or possibly 20/30. "The surgery went as well as any I've performed," he said with a smile. "Let's hope for the best." Michelle was overwhelmed with emotion the day she finally stepped out of her perpetually dark apartment and saw herself clearly in the mirror at my place. As tears streamed down her face, I stood beside her. "Why are you crying, babe?" I asked. "I look so much better now than I thought I did before. And now that I can see your face clearly, I can't believe someone as handsome as you would want to be with me. But mostly, I'm crying tears of joy because you've given me a fresh start, she said. With that, she turned to me, kissed me passionately, and nestled close, murmuring, "The only reason someone would treat me so well is if they loved me, Justin. Do you love me? I love you so much it hurts." I was taken aback. Wow, I should have been prepared for that, I thought, but quickly responded, "Yes, Michelle, I love you," kissing her in return. My reasons were twofold. I wanted her to believe it, knowing it would deeply affect Giselle if I ended things with her, and despite my efforts not to, I realized I might actually be in love with Michelle. After a few minutes of kissing, Michelle led me to the bed. I behaved badly during my recovery, she admitted, pouting. "Really?" I replied. "Despite Dr. Noy's warning not to exercise, I use the Kegel machine twice a day. I think now I could crush a banana in water," she giggled. "Let's check it out," I replied readily. 5 months after Michelle and I had our first intimate meeting after surgery, a lot had changed. Michelle's vision improved to 20/30 in her right eye and 20/40 in her left eye. With the help of contact lenses, her vision could be adjusted to 20/20 in both eyes, and she looked amazing. Our physical intimacy, enhanced by Michelle's exercises and fueled by the deep, true love she felt for me, was incomparable. I couldn't imagine that it could be better in terms of quality or quantity. Realizing my love for Michelle, I proposed to her. She cried out with tears in her eyes, "Yes, yes, yes," when I put the ring on her finger. Meanwhile, Brett received an anonymous DVD showing his wife Giselle cheating on him with some guy on red sheets, with their baby crying in the background. My face was blurred, and there were no details linking the scene to me, including the background or the red sheets that had been discarded long ago. I learned the following details from my attractive fiancé. Brett extended his trip by 5 days while Giselle was in San Francisco. It was noticeable that she was pregnant, and if she didn't get pregnant on the day of Brett's return, that is, a few days after that, then most likely the child is from me. Brett and Giselle didn't get along and seemed to be close to divorce. Brett had problems with Giselle dating someone else, even though they had no problems with their romance. Finances were tight. My elderly parents helped them, despite their limited means. Giselle no longer works as a waitress in a restaurant. Now she takes part-time college courses and helps me at work. Her sharp mind was hidden behind her poor eyesight, and she took up research without difficulty. Things are going very well in my business, now that I've found happiness with a much better woman than before. I sometimes thank Brett and Giselle for being jerks and promiscuous, respectively.